Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. We're very much at the end. We're finishing the eighth book. Today is going to be a two-part series. So, beginning the first part of the last part, he ends book eight in chapters 61 to 100. The end of it is the summer of the 21st year of the war. Now, therefore, I'm going to be breaking this in half. I'm going to be probably doing 20 chapters today and then chapters 20 some other day. And then I'll have one more last session of this reading the epilogue of not it's not him from epilogue, but it's the author, the edition we're doing, to talk about some background of what happened, about what we'll read that section to talk about the after effects, things that he doesn't address. Now, through the reading, we have always known that he in other words, he's talked about events foreshadowing the fall of the Athens will fall. The walls of Athens will be knocked down by the Persian Lysander, will destroy them. Lysander or Pisander, depends. I think this translation goes to Pisander. Uh, uh, so, so let's take off where we are. Again, we're using the Crawley translations of the landmark Thucydides. We're doing chapter 61 today, and this is over here. So that's it. Early in the spring, in the following summer, Delekides, a Spartan, was sent with a small force by land to the Hellespont. Okay, this is the Hellespont. The Hellespont is this is Dardanelles. Dardanelles, where from the water passage into the Black Sea. Okay, and all through the Black Sea, in the Black Sea, there's all these Greek cities. This is were given independence after the Greeks defeated the Persians. Okay, and the Persians would like to regain control. There's all these Greek cities there. Many of them are Ionian and therefore allies of Athens, and therefore they are hoping that they will revolt against them. The Athenians revolt. Remember, all during this after the collapse of the defeat in Sicily, that all of a sudden all the subject cities of Athens, the Ionian cities, are kind of rebelling, and what's happening is this is creating a problem for Athens. But Athens is trying to hold it down, and keep the Spartans are kind of doing things like this, and we talked about some of these things. Now Spartans are committed themselves to help the Dardanelles capture the Dardanelles, so that they would help remove Athenian control and to um, help free the cities. Okay, so therefore, with a small force to land the Hellespont to bring about the revolt of Adidos, Abydos, which is a Milesian. Okay, this is the Dardanelles right here, right? This is Dios. This is where it is. A colony with the Chians, while Aristoclus was at a loss how to help them. Were compelled to fight at sea by the pressure of the siege. While Arist, uh, okay, this is the Spartan, I think it's Spartan. Aris Locos was still at Rhodes. This is Rhodes is down here. Where's Rhodes? Rhodes are down here someplace. Yeah, down here. This is where Rhodes is. This is the island of Lesbos. This is Samos. Uh, uh, this is Chios, Chians, right? So therefore, you see, this is the geography of the situation. Um, Were still at Rhodes. They had received from Mytilus as their commander after the death of Pedastros, a Spartan named Leon, who had come out with Antitheses and 12 vessels, which had been on guard at Mytilus, which 5 of which were Thurian, 4 Syracusan, and 1 Enea, 1 Milesian, and one Leon's own. Accordingly, the Chians marched out in mass and took up a strong position, while 36 of their ships put out and engaged 32 of the Athenians. And after a tough fight, in which the Chileans and their allies had rather the best of it, and as it now late, they retired to their city. Immediately after this, Derle- Dercyllides, Aeneas, Dercyllides arrived by land from Mytilus and Ados, and in the Hellespont revolted to him and to Phrasabas. Remember, this is the Persian king man here, right? And Lamp Lampicillus 2 days later. So therefore, to him and to this person, these cities on the Hellespont. Upon receipt of this news, Strombichocles hastily sailed from Chios with 24 Athenian ships, some transports carrying hoplites being in their number, and defeating Lampices, who came out against him, took Lampekitus, which was unfortified, at the first assault, and making prize of the slaves and goods, restored the freedmen to their homes, and went on to Edibus, Ab- Abdos. The inhabitants there, however, refused to capitulate, and when his assault failed to take the place, he sailed over to the coast opposite and made Serestos, the city on the Chinosian, in the Chersonese, once held by the Persians, the center of the defense of the whole Hellespont. In the meantime, the Chians commanded a sea more than before, and the Peloponnesians at Mytilus and and Astoculus, hearing of the sea fight and of the departure of the squadrons with Strombichocles, took fresh courage, coasting along with two vessels to Charles and uh, this is the Spartan admiral, Astoculus, took the ships from that place and now moved with the whole fleet upon Samos, from where, however, he sailed back to Mytilus, as the Athenians did not put out against him, owing to their suspicions of one another. For it was about this time, or even before, that the democracy was put down at Athens, when Lysander and the envoy returned from Tissaphernes to Samos. They at once strengthened still further the control of the army itself, and induced the upper classes in Thamos to join them in establishing an oligarchy, the very form of government which a party of them had recently risen to avoid. At the same time, the Athenians at Samos, after a consultation among themselves, determined to let Alcibiades alone, since he refused to join them, and besides was not the man for an oligarchy. Um, and now that they were once embarked on this course, to see for themselves how they best could prevent their ruin, the ruin of their cause, and meanwhile to sustain the war, to contribute without state money, and all else that might be required from their own private estates, as they would henceforth labor for themselves alone. After encouraging each other in these resolutions, they now at once set off half the envoys in Pisander to do what was necessary at Athens, with instructions to establish oligarchies on their way in all the subject cities which they might touch at, dispatched the other half in different directions to other dependencies. Ditapetes also, who was in the neighborhood of Charles, who had been elected to command of the Thracian district of the empire, was sent off to his command, and arriving at Thrasos, abolished democracy there. Within 2 months of his departure, however, the Thasians began to fortify their city, and began quickly to tired of the aristocracy, called allied to Athens, when they daily expected to receive freedom from Sparta. Indeed, there was a party of them whom the Athenians had banished with the Peloponnesians, who, with their friends in the city, were already making every effort to bring up a squadron and to bring about the revolt of Thrasos. And this party thus saw exactly what they most wanted done. That is to say, the reformation of the government without risk and the abolition of democracy, which would have opposed them. Things at Thanos thus turned out just the contrary to what the oligarch conspirators at Athens expected. And the same is, in my opinion, was the case in many of the other dependencies. As the cities no sooner got a moderate government and liberty of action than they went on to absolute freedom without being at all seduced by the show of reform offered by Athens. Pisander and his colleagues on their voyage along a shore abolished and had been as had been determined the democracies in the cities, and so took some hoplites from certain places as their allies, and so came to Athens. Here they found most of their work already done by their associates. Some of the younger men banded together and secretly assassinated one Androcles, the chief leader of the people, and the man mainly responsible for the banishment of Alcibiades. Androcles being singled out because he was a popular leader and because they sought also his death to recommend themselves to Alcibiades, who was, as they supposed, to be recalled, and to make Tissaphernes their friend. There were also some other obnoxious persons whom they secretly did away with the same manner. Meanwhile, their cry in public was no one should be given except to persons serving in the war, and that not more than a 5,000 should share in the government, and those such as were able most to serve in the city in person and in purse. So in other words, no longer paying it, was they had to contribute to persons and their things. But this was merely a catchword for the multitude, as the authors of the revolution were really to govern. However, the assembly and the council still met notwithstanding, although they discussed nothing that was not approved off by the conspirators, who both supplied the speakers and reviewed in advance what they were to say. Fear and the sight of the numbers of conspirators closed the mouths of the rest, and or if any ventured to rise in opposition, he was promptly put to death in some convenient way. And there was neither search for the murderers nor justice to be had against them if suspected. But the people remained motionless, being so thoroughly cowed that men thought themselves lucky to escape violence, even when they held their tongues. And an exaggerated belief in the number of the conspirators also demoralized the people, rendering helpless by the magnitude of the city and by their being uncertain about each other and being without means of finding out what those numbers really were. And the same reason it was impossible for anyone to speak his mind to a neighbor and to concert concert measures to defend himself, as he would have had to speak either to one whom he did not know or whom he knew but did not trust. Indeed, all the popular party approached each other with suspicion, thinking his neighbor involved in what was going on, the conspirators having in their ranks persons whom no one could ever have believed capable of joining an oligarchy. And it was these who who made the many so suspicious and helped to procure impunity for the few by confirming the commons in their mistrust of one another. At this juncture, Pisander and his colleague arrived, and lost no time in completing the job. First, they assembled the people and moved to elect 10 commissioners with full powers to frame a constitution. a regime, the Constitution, and with when and that when this was done, they should on an appointed day later before the people appointed day lay before the people their opinion as the best mode of governing the city. Afterwards, when the day arrived, the conspirators enclosed in the assembly at Colonos, the temple of Poseidon, a little more than a mile outside the city. When the commissioners simply brought forward this single motion, that any Athenian might propose with impunity whatever measure he pleased, and that heavy penalties would be imposed upon any who should indict for illegality or molest him for doing so. The way thus cleared, it was now plainly declared that all tenure at office and receipt of pay under the existing institutions were at an end, and the 5 men and that 5 men must be elected as presidents, who should in turn elect 100, and each of the 100 3 apiece, and that this body, thus made up to 400, should enter the council chamber with full powers and govern as they judged best, and should otherwise constrive 5,000 whenever they pleased. The man who moved this resolution was Pisander, who was throughout the chief ostensible agent in putting down the democracy. But he who uh, concerted the whole affair and prepared the way for the catastrophe, and who had given the greatest thought to the matter, was Antiphon, one of the best men of his day in Athens, who, with a head to contrive measures and a tongue to recommend them, did not willingly come forward in the assembly or upon any public scene, being ill looked upon by the multitude owing to his reputation for cleverness, and who yet was the one man best able to aid in the courts or before an assembly the suitors who required his opinion. Indeed, when he was afterwards himself tried for his life on the charge of having been concerned in setting up this very government, when the 400 were overthrown and harshly dealt with by the commons, he made that what would seem to be the best defense of any known at the time. Uh, uh, um, uh, Pernicus also went beyond all others in his zeal for the oligarchy, afraid of Alcibiades, and assured that he was no stranger to the intrigues with Aristoclus, Aristoculus at Samos. He held that no oligarchy was ever likely to restore him, and once embarked in the enterprise, proved where danger is to be faced by far the staunchest of them all. Um, Thermeneke, son of Hagon, was also one of the foremost of the subverters of the democracy, a man as able in counsel as in debate, conducted by so many and by such sagacious heads. The enterprise, great as it was, not unnaturally went forward, although it was no light matter to deprive the Athenian people its freedom, almost 100 years after the disposition of the tyrants, when it had been not only not subject to any during the whole of that period, but accustomed during more than half of it to rule over subjects of its own. The assembly ratified the proposed constitution without a single opposition voice, and was then dissolved, after which the 400 were brought into the council chamber in the following way. On, on, on account of the enemy at Delia, all the Athenians were constantly on the wall or in the ranks at the military various military posts. On the day the persons not on the secret were allowed to go home as usual, while orders were given to the accomplices of the conspirators to hang about, without making any demonstration at some little distance from the posts, in the case of any opposition to what was being done, to seize the arms and put it down. There were also some Andrians and Tenians, 300 Carthages, Caristanians, um, and some of the settlers in Aegea, come with their own arms for the very purpose, who had received similar instructions. These dispositions completed, the 400 went, each with the dagger conceived in their person, accompanied by 120 youths, whom they employed whenever violence was needed, and appeared before the consuls chosen by lot in the council chamber, and told them to take their pay and be gone, themselves bringing it for the whole for the whole of the residue of their term, giving it to them as they went out. Upon the council withdrawing in this way, without venturing any objections, the rest of the citizens made no movement. The 400 entered the council chambers, and for the present contented themselves with drawing lots for their perennies, and making their prayers and sacrificing to the gods upon entering office, but afterwards departed wildly from the democratic system of government. Except on the account of Alcibiades, they did not recall the exiles, ruled the city by force, putting to death some men, though not many, whom they thought it convenient to remove, and imprisoning and banishing others. They also sent to Agis, the king of the Spartan king at Delicia, to say that they desired to make peace, and that he might reasonably be disposed to treat now that he had to deal with instead of the inconstant people. Aegeus, however, did not believe the tranquility of the city, or that the commons would thus in a moment give up their ancient liberty, but thought that the sight of a large Spartan force would be sufficient to excite them if they were not already in commotion, of which he was by no means certain. Accordingly, he gave the envoys of the 400 an answer which held out no hopes of accommodations, and sending for large reinforcements from the Peloponnesians not long after. And these, with the garrison from Decla, descended to the very walls of Athens, hoping either that the civil disturbance might help to subdue them on his terms, or in confusion to be expected within and without the city, that they might even surrender without a blow being struck. At, at all events, he thought he would succeed in seizing the long wall and barred of his defenders. However, the Athenians saw him come close up without making the least disturbance within the city, and sending out their cavalry with a number of their hoplites, light troops, and archers, shot down some of the soldiers who approached too near, and got possession of some arms and the dead. Um, Upon this, Aegeus, at last convinced, led his army back again, and remained with his own troop in the old position at Declia, sent for the reinforcements back home after a few days, stayed in Attica. After this, the 400 preserving sent another embassy to Aegeus, and now, meeting with a better reception, at the suggestion dispatched envoys to Sparta to negotiate a treaty, being desirous of making peace. They also sent 10 men to Samos to reassure the army and to explain that the oligarchy was not established to harm the city or the citizens, but to save the country as a whole, and that there were 5,000, not 400 only, concerned. Although what with their expedition and employments abroad, the Athenians had never yet assembled to discuss the question whether enough to bring 5,000 of them together. The emissaries were also told what to say upon all other posts, and were sent over immediately after the establishment of the government, which feared as it turned out correctly, that the mass of seamen would not be willing to remain under oligarchy constitution, uh, and the evils beginning there might be the means of their overthrow. Indeed, at Samos, the question of the oligarchy had already entered upon a new phase, the following events having taken place at the time that the 400 were conspiring. The part of the Samian population which had been mentioned as rising against the upper classes and had as being the Democratic Party had now turned round and yielding to the solicitations of Xander during the visit, and on the Athenians and the conspiracy at Samos, bound themselves to oath to the number of 300, and were about to fall upon the rest of their fellow citizens, whom they now in turn regarded as the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, they put to death one Hyperbolus, an Athenian, a persistent fellow who had been ostracized not from fear of his influence or position, but because he was a scoundrel and a disgrace to the city. Being aided by Carminus, one of the generals, and some of the Athenians with him, to whom they had sworn friendship, and with whom they had perpetuated other acts of the kind, and now determined to attack the majority. The latter got wind of what was coming, and told two generals, Leon and Demon, who, on account of the credit which they had enjoyed with the people, were unwilling supporters of the oligarchy, and also uh, uh, Therasbulus and Therasyclidus, the captain of the former a captain of the Trimene, and the latter serving with the hoplites, besides certain others who had always been thought most opposed to the conspirators, appealing to them not to look on and see them destroyed, and Samos, the sole remaining stay of their empire, taken from the Athenians. Upon hearing this, the persons whom they addressed now went round to the soldiers one by one and urged them to resist, especially the crew of the Peralus, which had made up entirely of Athenians and free men, but always been enemies of oligarchy. When even when there were no such things, even when there were no such thing existing, and Leon and Dimona left some ships for their protection in case they had to sail away anywhere themselves. Accordingly, when the 300 attacked the people, all of these came to the rescue, and furthermost, all the crew of the Perlados and the Sumerian majority gained the victory, and putting to death some 30 of the 300, banishing 3 others of the Reading, accorded the amnesty to the rest, and lived together under a democratic government for the future. The ship Paralacus, and Chaereas, son of Archistratus, on board, an Athenian who had taken active part in the revolution, was now without loss of time sent off by the Samians and the army to Athens to report what occurred. The fact that the 400 were in power not yet known. When they sailed into the harbor, the 400 immediately arrested 3 of the Parilai, and taken the vessel from the rest, shifted them into a troop ship, and sent them to keep guard on Euboea. Uh, 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 um, uh, Chaereas, however, managed to hide as soon as he saw how things stood, and returned to Samos, drawing a picture to the soldiers of the horrors being enacted in Athens, in which everything was exaggerated, saying that all were punished with lashes, that no one could say a word against the power holders, that the soldiers' wives and children were outraged, and that it was intended to seize and shut up the relatives of all the army at Samos, who were not of the government's way of thinking, and to be put to death in case of the disobedience, and a host of other harmful inventions. On hearing this, the first the first thought of the army was to fall upon the chief authors of the oligarchy and upon all the rest concerned. Eventually, however, they desisted from this idea, and when men of moderate views opposed it, and warned them against ruining their cause with the enemy close at hand and ready for battle. After this, Thrasybulus, the son of Lycius, and Thrasylus, the chief leader in the revolution, now wishing in the most public manner to change the government of Samos to a democracy, bound all the soldiers by the most tremendous oath, and that and those of the oligarchic party more than any other to accept the democratic government and be united to prosecute actively the war against the Peloponnesians and to be enemies of the 400 and to hold no communication with them. At the same time, also taken by the Sarmatians in full, all of the Sarmatians of full age, and the soldiers associated the Sarmatians in all their affairs, and the fruits of their dangers, having the convictions that there was no way of escape for themselves or for the Sumerians, and the success of the 400s or the enemy at Midless must be their ruin. The struggle was now between and the army trying to force a democracy upon the city, and the 400 an oligarchy upon the army. Meanwhile, the soldiers immediately held the assembly in which they disposed the former generals and any of the captains whom they suspected, and chose new captains and generals to place them. And in addition to Thrasybulus and Thrasilus, whom they had already selected, they also stood up and encouraged one another, and among other things, urged that they ought not to lose heart because the city had revolted from them, as the party succeeding was smaller in every way, poorer in resources than themselves. They had the whole fleet with which to compel the other cities in their empire to give them money, just as they with had their base in the capital, having a city in Samos, which, far from lacking strength, had, when the war came within inches of depriving the Athenians of command of the sea, while, as far as the enemy was concerned, they had the same base of operation as before. Indeed, with the fleet in their hands, they were better able to provide themselves with supplies than the government at home. It was their advanced position at Samos, which had throughout enabled the home authorities to command the entrance into Piraeus. And if they refused to give them back the constitution, they would now find that the army was more in a position to exclude them from the sea than they were to exclude the army. Besides, the city was little more or no use in enabling them to overcome the enemy, and they had lost nothing in losing those who had no longer either money to send them, and soldiers having to find this for themselves, or good counsel, which entitles cities to direct armies. On the contrary, even in this, the home government had done wrong in abolishing the institutions of their ancestors, while the army maintained these institutions and would try to force the home government to do likewise. So that even in a point of good counsel, the camp had as good counselors as the city. Moreover, they had only to grant Alcibiades security for his person and his recall, and he would surely be only too glad to procure them the alliance of the king. And after all, if they had failed completely, the navy with its possession, they still had numbers of places to retire to in which they would find cities and land. Debating together and comforting themselves in this manner, they pushed on their war measures as actively as ever, and 10 envoys were sent to Samos by 400, learning how matters stood while they were still at Delos, stayed quiet there. About this time, a cry rose among the soldiers in the Peloponnesian fleet at Midlus that Aristarchus and Tiresias were ruining their cause. Aristarchus, Aristobulus had not been willing to fight at sea, and either before, while they were still full of vigor, and the fleet of the Athens small, or now when the enemy was, as they were informed, in a condition of sedition, and his ships not yet united. But he kept on waiting for the Phoenician fleet from Thespeines, the Phoenician fleet from Thisaphernes, which had only a nominal existence at the risk of wasting away in activity. Yet Thisaphernes not only did not bring up the fleet in question, but was ruining their navy by payments made irregularly, and even then not made in full. There must they must therefore delay no longer, they insisted, but fight a decisive naval engagement. The Syracusans were the most urgent of all. The allies and Aristoculus, sorry, the Spartan admiral, aware of these rumors, had already decided in council to fight a decisive battle. And when the news reached them of the disturbance at Samos, they put to sea with all their ships, 110 in number, and ordering the Milesians to move by land to Machili, and set sail for that place. The Athenians, with 82 ships from Samos, were at that moment lying at Gulea in Manacles, a point where Samos approaches near the continent. Seeing the Peloponnesian fleet sailing against them, retired into Samos, not thinking themselves numerically strong enough to take all upon a battle. Samos, not thinking themselves numerically strong enough to stake all. And besides, they had intelligence from Metellus that the enemy wished to engage, were expecting to be joined from the Hellespont by Strambicicles, to whom a messenger had already been dispatched, with the ships that had gone to Chaos and Ebidos. The Athenians accordingly withdrew to Samos, and the Peloponnesians put in at Megli and encamped with the land forces of the Milesians and the peoples of the neighborhood. The next day they were about to sail Samos when news reached them on the arrival of Strambicles and his squadron from the Hellespont, whereupon they immediately sailed back to Metellus. The Athenians, thus reinforced, now in turn sailed against Metellus with 108 ships, wishing to fight a decisive battle, but as no one put out to meet them, sailed back to Samos. The same summer, okay, so let's stop here. Let's stop here at 79. Well, that's the. We'll stop here. At this, they convince the general to go get them. They do it. They send a force to go there. The Spartans do, and what happens? The Athenians, oh, there's not enough of us, so we turn back. As their forces get there and they get strong enough, then they send out they go to Samos. But at the same time, this happens. The Strambicipes, the Athenian, with the forces in the Hellespont, come down with the ships to meet them there, and that happens. And then they go to then the Athenians want to go on the attack. They go there, and the Spartans have run back already to Miltiades. So, so we end here. So if you have any comments, put the comments in below, or questions, or anything like this. If you like it, please like. If you don't like it, you can say you don't like it. You can do it like that. Please put comments and things like this. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe. Tell a friend, share this video with someone. It's the best way it happens. Share a video, say, "Oh, this has been cool. He's talking about the cities," and this is a very great thing. This is about this. Today was a great criticism of what happens. How the people can be, how the few, the elites, some of this can coup a democracy, destroy it, and the people are helpless stopping it. However, the soldiers and it's the people, the soldiers and the navy out there will come back. This would be the big change of revolution against the 300. Okay, um, so please, share with a friend and just tell them about the series, what we're doing here. Um, tomorrow we'll have the last episode of the history. We'll finish up. Uh, you can follow me on social media below, and if you want to help contribute, because I think I'm going to be doing Locke next. I'll do Locke's second treatise quickly. I'll just do a chapter a day, a chapter a day of Locke before I decide to do either Aristotle. I did something with President Sunday. We started it, but all of a sudden President Sunday had problems with his health, and also can't keep a schedule. Um, so I might do my own reading of Montesquieu, but I might also want to do the Aristotle because I want to get my Aristotle done. So I might do Aristotle. So I think after Locke, I'll do Aristotle, okay? Or maybe even Aristotle and do like alternative. We'll see what happens. Maybe just do like one, yeah, whatever. That's can do it. I will be posting things. I'm going to be starting this Monday 2 classes, and I'm going to be recording them. I'm going to be teaching Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and I will also be teaching a course on civil society and citizenship, where we will be looking at Victor Davis Hanson's Dying Citizen and looking at the question of citizenship and what makes citizenship possible. That's a master's degree. One is a general course of outside students from the university open course, that's Tocqueville, and the other course, the other course is for master students. It's going to be a small group of them, so it's a seminar. And it's a research seminar. So the course will be talking about these themes and these issues, but also talking about how to do research. I'm going to be taping both these courses, so I think it's going to be like episodes of that will be shown as for this as well. Okay, and that therefore I will be doing the reading sessions between those those class things. So I'll let you go. Again, if you want to help subscribe and help fund this thing, you can do a subscribe start program. I know people haven't done it. I haven't checked my. I think there's 1 or 2 people on Subscribe Star. I haven't looked at it yet. So $5 there, $5, whatever. I don't think anyone has done Patreon. Um, I haven't even looked at that correctly yet. I haven't gone and checked. Bad boy, bad boy. But again, so thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye bye.